Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Pete Tigers. It seems that many of the podcasts of late have focused on the poor conditions, lack of hatches, and the general shittiness of spring. It's now May, the sun has been shining, the maize are hatching, and it feels like we're properly underway. We've seen lots of trout being caught, and shout out to John Ogborn as well. You seem to be knocking the leather off the ball right now, buddy, so great work there. And it's been good to see mullet and bass being caught too. And with this thought in mind, I asked my guest along today to talk about his trips to the Hampshire coast. I'd like to welcome Paul Bettley along to the podcast. Paul, it's great to have you along. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, thanks, Pete. How are you?
Very well indeed, apart from, well, COVID aside, I must admit, but that aside, I'm doing pretty okay. I know we talked this morning a little bit, and you've been out already today fishing.
I have, yeah. I went out for a bit of an explore, a couple of new areas this morning. See how we get on. Seems all right, but I'll probably go out again this afternoon. It's low tide at the moment for us down here, so there's not much water about now.
And for our listeners, whereabouts are you based?
Well, I'm based in Gosport in Hampshire, and I'm fishing and guiding pretty much everywhere from Sussex all the way through to Lymington right at the other end of the Dorset way. So, yeah, fair stretch.
And does that mean that you're closely in touch with what's happening with the water? Being in Gosport, I'm guessing you're very, very close to the water. Does that keep you in touch with exactly the feel of the water and the season as it starts to unfold for you?
Yeah, very much so. I think, as you said in your intro, that water quality is obviously at the forefront of most anglers' mind at the moment. And, you know, Gosport is very much a coastal town. A lot of fishing boats based out of Gosport and Portsmouth, obviously. We do notice the difference. The water it's not what it was. Let's put it that way.
And is that affecting you? Have you noticed the amount of time that you've been fishing these coastal marks? Have you noticed the change in catches and behaviour of fish as a result?
I think not so much the change in behaviour, catches definitely, but a lot of that's down to we get a lot of what we refer to as May rot, and it's like a blanket weed, and there is an abundance of weed. Last year was horrendous for it. And whether that's a combination of the sewage being pumped into the water and the heat that we had last summer, it really brought on a big bloom of weed. And we've actually got one right now at the moment. It's making fishing more difficult. It's not clear, the water. It may pass early again. We'll just have to wait and see.
And do you think that's something that you're going to have to contend with, or does it sort itself out? Or you're mentioning the word sewage, so I'm guessing it probably doesn't. But is that something that you're hopeful that will suddenly sort itself out and that the water will clear for you? Or is that just how it is right now?
I think we're going to have to work around it for now. I know a few of the other guides, they found areas where it's less prominent. But I think generally it's getting worse, and we are going to have to work around it. I don't see there being a quick fix for this at all. Is the things I read, the things that are on the news, and that it doesn't look good generally at the moment. But I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. There's a lot of people doing a lot of work to try and push the importance of keeping the water clear. I don't think people realise that the rivers, they do flow into the sea, and what's coming in them is coming out into the coast, and the immediate coastline is hammered by it at the moment. There's definitely signs of damage. I don't think the general public will necessarily notice it as much as the anglers, maybe. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair to the public, but sometimes you can smell it in the air. Then the public can notice it. But when we're out in there, when you come back in and your waders they've got like a film over them, which this is new. This is only the last few years this has been happening. It's not pleasant, but the fish are still here at the moment. The fish this year, saltwater, they're being caught early as well. So is it bad? Is it bad? Yes, it's bad for the water. Is it affecting the fishing? Not yet. but I think it will.
And you make a very interesting point about the rivers as well, of course, because being myself primarily river based, that you're thinking about what's going on in your own little ecosystem or environment, yet that's flowing down and impacting you as well. And I think that's worth bearing in mind as well. And I guess also you're getting a wider group of users that hopefully are able to put more pressure on water companies, government, whoever that may be, along with outfits like Surfers Against Sewage as well, who are putting pressure. So I think these things are, and we've talked about it before, I assume that you do this, that you report the smells, you report those sorts of things. And as anglers as well, we should be doing that as well, even along the coastline.
Oh, I totally agree. It needs reporting. It needs constant attention for people to take notice. There's a lot of high profile people doing a lot of good work. Fergal Sharkey, for starters, is really pushing this and pushing it hard on social media and is achieving results, which is what we want. Fish Legal, I believe, won their case against Southern Water recently. Again, this is high profile stuff that is really pushing this to the public, and I think it needs the public intervention, because if I'm honest, I don't think the people who are responsible for this and the people above them in government, I don't think they care enough to do anything about it until it affects them. When it starts affecting them, it'll be too late.
Nice point. Before I start ranting, we're going to move on a little bit now. And I'd love to know a little bit more about your backstory, because often I talk on here about people's entry into fly fishing, the traditional route, and it may be a small still water, perhaps reservoirs, perhaps then into rivers, and then perhaps looking into your part of the world into saltwater fly fishing as well. But yours is a little bit different as well, isn't it? That you didn't go the more usual route.
Oh, definitely not. I started as a course angler. I can't have been much more than 4 or 5 when I started fishing with my dad. My dad was a carp angler. And until quite recently, he's now a fly fisherman himself. But definitely a stillwater angler. He likes his stillwaters. He likes the open spaces and not having to contend with bushes and reeds and things. So he's quite happy doing that. But as a carp angler, he was very good. And for a long time, my transition from bait fish fishing, silverfish, rudd, roach, perch, and then into carp angling, I used to spend weekends in bivvies with rods everywhere and bite alarms and stuff like that. I did that for a very long time. And then sort of moved into the predator, pike and zander and perch and things like that, which I found I preferred that. It was a bit more mobile as well. You could go out, with a rod and a lure and go and look for pike and look for perch and zander and things. And I enjoyed that aspect. And then my best friend, we've been friends for over 40 years now. We grew up together, we went to school together, and then we fished together. He was always more inclined to be a saltwater angler, and he bullied me into doing it. So I did, but the bait smells awful in saltwater angling. Everything's messy. So we started lure fishing instead. Just down the road, in fact, in Leon Solent. We didn't really know what we were doing in the saltwater. We're throwing lures around in the shallows and fish are scattering everywhere. And now know that those fish were mullet. Didn't realise that at the time. So we thought, we'd give fly fishing a go because it's going to land more gently and perhaps not scare everything. So we went to a local tackle store. It's not there anymore, unfortunately. Hansford's it's long gone now. But the guy that ran it, Tony, he sold Neil and I 12 weight fly rods, 5 weight lines. We had no idea what we were doing. Absolutely no idea at all. So I got on the internet, started looking it up, and taught myself how to fly cast. And I could at that time I could put a line in the water and I could bring a fish in. I won't say I could cast, because when I finally decided to do something about this, and I went along to a Gaia meeting, and I think it was Rob Doyle assessed my casting. He tore it apart for me, and it turned out I couldn't cast. I couldn't cast at all. But that journey there was it. It was very odd way to go into it. It turns out Gaia is not for me anyway, and I've moved into the FFI now, where I think my casting's got better. I mean, people come to me to be taught how to cast now, so I'm pretty sure I'm doing okay. It's been fun. I'm glad I stuck with it. I definitely prefer it to bait fishing. There's no denying that. I like the idea of being able to be mobile. And I just like the variety of species you can catch with the same techniques. It's everything, like you were saying earlier, from trout, grayling, all the way through to, I mean, I've caught cabera, snapper, mahi in Central America. It's the same stuff. I got an understanding of how it works now, so I feel better about it.
I like the sound of that. And you bring up some really interesting points, because as you were describing your path into fishing, many of the things you said, I'm thinking, well, there's a fly angler. When you said you liked being mobile with the pike fishing, and then thinking about your presentation and scattering fish. And there's almost like there was a dormant fly angler gene in there that was looking to come out, and you released it. I've had so many people over the years say buying kit on a whim, and a shop just dusting down any old crap that they had in the cupboard, and then trying to sell that on and get rid of it. And 12 weight rods and a 5-weight line, getting that to load must have been kind of interesting. I would think you probably needed a good 70 feet of line or so to make the rod actually bend, if not more. So it's kind of interesting from that point of view. But once you got that, and we'll come on to the guiding and the instruction and your choices for association a little bit later. But was that the point where you managed to learn to cast a little bit that you thought fly rods for me? Or do you still sort of, because of the soft lures, etc., there's so many, they share so many backgrounds between a fly rod as well. Do you use both of them still, or is it fly rod the rod of choice for you really more than anything else?
No, I still really enjoy lure fishing as well, or the dark art, as most who come out with me refer to it as now. I really enjoy it. There's still a lot of skill involved in that as well. And to be fair, when I'm guiding, I actually use lure rods when I go to explore new areas, because you can cover so much more ground so much faster. And if you're trying to work out where fish are, if there's even fish there, throwing out either topwater hard plastics or soft plastics just to see if there's fish about, it makes it far easier to assess an area, say whether or not it's going to be worth coming back with a fly rod. So I don't think I'll ever give up lure fishing. I'm a big fan of it. And if I'm honest, you can't beat a topwater bust up from a bass. It's, there's some serious aggression from those fish, and it is properly exciting stuff. But primarily, I prefer the fly rod, I've got to be honest. There's something about, you've got to remember there's a difference between casting and fishing. And don't practice your casting when you're fishing. But when you throw out a very nice loop when you're fishing, even in that, that's a good feeling when that lands. And it doesn't necessarily matter if there's a fish coming. It might deserve the fish, but it might not come. But that alone, the satisfaction from that, you don't get that with a lure rod. Not very often. Occasionally you'll put a lure in an area and think, well, that was a good shot. But nothing beats, for me, watching a nice tight loop travel out across the water and land where you wanted it to.
Can't disagree with that. And the debate from about 1876 has still been, how do we bring more people in? Do you think that lure community is where we should be looking? And are you seeing people transitioning, as you have, across from lure rods to fly rods?
There's definitely a crossover there. I fish with a few lure anglers that are interested in it now. I've got a couple of that are now clients and are learning to cast. But I think the attraction of going back to the lure is too easy, because if you can cast a regular rod, you can cast a lure, and it's far easier to learn than a whole new technique. But I do think that's the area for new people coming into the sport. The similarities between how you're fishing as opposed to how you're casting are closer. Topwater, using gurglers, crease flies, poppers, and things like that is very much like using topwater lures, Klausers and deceiver patterns, and any of the weird and wonderful, synthetic fiber bait fish that we tie in, that very much using like soft plastics, and you treat them in the same way. So there's a definite crossover, and I do think we're going to see more and more. The saltwater fly fishing thing has absolutely exploded in probably the last 5 or 6 years. When I started fly fishing in the salt, there was pretty much me and my best friend on the south coast here doing it. I say doing it, we had no idea what we were doing it. We went away from it and went back to regular fishing and to come back, and now it's everywhere. It's, Orvis are doing great things with the festivals down here on the Hailing Island. That's getting bigger and bigger every year. It's more and more popular. It's all over social media now. It is good for the sport. There's no denying it. I know there's a lot of air quotes purists that don't necessarily like what we're doing because it's not flies and it's all heavy and it's all hauling, but it's fly fishing. It's the same thing. For me, it's the same thing. And I think if you're going to call yourself a purist or a traditionalist, if you're not using split cane rods and silk lines, then you're not. If you're using carbon fiber products, you're in the same boat as the rest of us.
Yeah, I hate the term purist, I have to say. And you bring up some interesting points there about, we can use the purist word as well, but also the perception. And I'm going to date myself and look even more uncool than normal by saying the scene of lure fishing to me seems younger. It seems vibrant. And so with saltwater fly fishing, I call it, I guess, for me at least, the second coming of it, because I remember when it got going the first time, certainly since I've been fishing, that fly fishing to other pastimes still seems dull, middle-aged, retirement age anglers, and I'll use that J.R. bloody Hartley thing again. And for me, saltwater fly fishing is the great way to have a new angle on it, and for people outside to say, actually, this looks really good. And this is one of the great things about social media, with people like yourself and many others who are out there looking cool, beards, hair, tattoos in some cases as well, looks a little bit different and plays into that, or pulls us away from that stereotypical view of fly anglers. And that's good for fishing in that. And I think that's the area, and I'm probably said this before, I think this is the way, this and the course fishing on a fly is the way that we bring people in, isn't it? It's got to be, hasn't it? It looks, like you say, that the way that you can bring content to a wider audience, that they feel, actually, this is my tribe as well. And that's the way to do it, isn't it?
I totally agree. And I think I am the embodiment of that example. Long hair, beard, tattoos, that is me. I'm very much the rock and roll fly fisherman. Actually, no, let's be honest. That's probably reserved for somebody far bigger than me in the rock and roll world. But it's very much the case. And I find that the acceptance I've had in the fly fishing community for being who I am and the way I am, it's been astonishing. I'm so grateful to the people I've met, the people I've worked with, and the opportunities I've been given, that just taking me as an example shows that pretty much anybody can do this with the right sort of mindset towards it. We're going to be coming from those areas, like you said, from lure fishermen and coarse fishermen. Fly fishing for carp is great fun. It is tremendous fun on a fly rod. And as an ex-carp angler, it's far more exciting than sitting in a tent in the pouring rain waiting for a beep. And I did that for years. But casting a fly out and, when they connect, God, do they go some as well. You get into a decent carp, you will know all about that. I don't think you'll find a harder fighting freshwater fish pound for pound on a fly rod. I think you'd struggle. I really do. I mean, maybe catfish. I know a few people are fly fishing for catfish. I think that's going to put a bend in the rod as well. But carp on the fly rod, exciting times. People should be having a look at that. Have a go. Get yourself a casting lesson. It doesn't take much to get a fly line out in the water properly. Once you're there, have a look around, see what's about. Coarse fishing, definitely. Saltwater, I think that's a step up again because the conditions change things there. You've got a lot more to contend with. You've got the tide, you've got the waves for starters. Just even a small swell can change things on the line. And the big one is the wind. If you can get a day like I had this morning was lovely. With no wind, very easy to cast. But mostly in the UK, it's going to be blowing while you're out there. So you're going to have to learn to deal with that. In honesty, the only way to do that is go and get lessons. You're going to learn a lot off social media without a shadow of a doubt. And it's very helpful if you are having lessons to use that as and then sort of a backup to what you're doing, a refresher maybe to, you go and have your lesson, you do a few bits, check it out on YouTube. You can find there's some good people on there teaching some good stuff. It will get you in a better position to enjoy what you're doing further down the line. And for the guys that are going to make that transition from coarse fishing or lure fishing or whatever they're doing now into fly fishing, totally agree with you. This is the way to go. The salt and coarse fishing, that's the way to go. And it's affordable. That's the thing. You can get a day ticket to fish for carp for like £20. Try and get a trout day for that. It's nearly impossible.
Great points. Really very, very good points. And you talked about the fish being around earlier on the coast as well this year. Is that a trend that has continued? And then does that mean that this growth that we're seeing, and, we're going through a nice spell at the moment of good weather, that people may consider now hitting the coast a little bit earlier? So in turn, that's going to grow that arm of our sport a little bit more. So is that a trend that you're seeing, that the fish are starting, is it year on year they're coming slightly earlier each time, or is it this year that you've noticed it? And does that mean that more people are going to want to go fish the salt a little bit sooner?
I think a lot of the lure guys this season and into last season, they kept going. I stopped in November last year. I switched over to pike and grayling at that time. But a lot of the lure guys I go with, they carried on. And they had success all the way through December, January. A few of them I know are trying to get a fish every month of the year now. They're there to be caught. There's no doubt about it. We have good harbours down here that hold fish. We get a lot of resident bass between Sussex and all the way through to Dorset that don't go too far. You kind of learn to tell that the difference in colour in the fish is, resident bass, in my opinion, tend to be the very darker ones, almost black sometimes across the back, whereas the fish that go in and out with the tide tend to be very silver. I'm no expert. I don't even know if that's true, but that's my experience of it. And I think a lot of guys would agree with me on that. The bigger fish tend to be darker, tend to be resident fish. They don't go too far. So they're there to be caught, but it is so difficult through the winter months that you have got to be dedicated to this. And with the greatest respect, I'm not that dedicated to it. I'm not going out in -2 with a fly rod to go fishing for bass, thinking I'm probably not going to catch when there are rivers and canals with pike in. I'm going to go and do that instead. That said, it is getting earlier. Last year was a weird year. Last year we had some big storms, I think sort of June, July time. And I think it broke up a lot of the bait fish in the Solent, and the fish went with them. So the end of last year, not a lot was being caught, but what was being caught tended to be substantially bigger. I don't know what caused that. I don't know if it was, just coincidence, but I do think there's mileage in the storms breaking up the bait fish and the fish going with them. The year before that, we had an unbelievably hot summer, and the bass especially just gorged themselves on the bait fish in the harbours. So fishing became really weird sort of August, September time, that they would hit the flies or the lures. And I think they were doing it out of instinct rather than feeding, because they'd hit it once and then go away. Whereas last year, they would hit it, then they'd hit it again, then they'd hit it again, then they'd hit it again. And this was all the way up to November. So there's definite changes happening. I think the weather plays a bigger part than people expect in it, because of where we are with, we have prevailing southwesterlies. If we get a swing away from that for a large period of time, I do think the food is moving and the fish move with it. So reading the weather patterns, it's an art, I think, not a science. I don't think it necessarily matters. I mean, people talk about high and low pressure, and whilst I think, again, there is mileage in that, nature doesn't always agree with you. Low pressure days, people say the fish won't be feeding, etc. I've had low pressure days where you haven't stopped catching. Rainy days, stormy days where the fish are there in abundance, and high pressure days where nothing, absolutely nothing, no fish, no sign of life anywhere. Sometimes nature just does what it wants to do. All we can do is have a good guess at it.
There are some great points there and great information. And I think you're putting your knowledge out there that to somebody listening, you clearly know what you are talking about. And so for listeners, and myself included, I'd love to get a little bit more of a sense of your approach to a day's fishing. And I guess we've been talking primarily for bass. So let's start with that. And you're going for a bass day. And I'd love to know, what's the one, when you're guiding somebody, what's the first piece of advice that you like to give them?
I think if they've never done it before, if they've never fished in the salt before, if a lot of the clients I get come from trout backgrounds, the first thing you kind of explain to me is there's going to be a lot of water, but don't worry, that's okay. Because I get clients come down to look at it and go, wow. It's like, yeah, it's a lot, but it's okay. Fish are fish. Predators, they tend to behave in the same way. They're in the same areas. They're looking for cover. They're looking for flow. They're looking for patches of weed, or they'll be in the shallows, and they're looking for food, but they're looking for it in the easiest way possible. They're not looking to expend much energy. Exactly the same as trout fishing. It's a different environment. It's a different area, but the principle is the same. The next thing they have to understand is there's going to be a lot of casting and a lot of nothing happening, because you got to find them first. They're not easy to find. It's not like looking into the tests where you can see the fish with, even without polarized glasses at times. Sometimes you can't see them and you have to use your best guess. And that's where guides come in, because the guides, and there's a handful of us across the coast now. I think there's a few of us that guide on the fly, but there's a lot of lure guides now as well. They know what they're doing. They put the hours in. There's a few guys in Chichester, they really put the hours in, way more than I can. I mean, I have a full-time job as well. These guys just do that. And they know what they're talking about. They're a great font of information. Most of us share info with each other as well. Some don't. Some are quite precious about their marks. And I kind of get that. But it's saltwater. It's free to everybody. You're not going to protect everything all the time. And you have to accept that people are going to find it one way or another. I post on YouTube. I post on Facebook and whatever form of social media. I accept that people are going to find my marks. It is what it is. But I think, for me, that gets more people into the sport. If people can see where I'm fishing, that's not all of the battle. You need to know where the fish are. what to use, what time of day, what state of the tide. And if you don't know those things, that mark could be dead when you get there. So it's hit and miss if you don't know what you're doing. So get yourself a guide. Not necessarily me. There are plenty of other guides. Get yourself a guide and go and have a look. They can give you the tools to do that. They can take away the awesome look of such a large amount of water. And it flows. The flows can be extraordinarily fast that you're fishing in, faster than stretches of river that you would think to fish in. But the fish are there. The fish do what fish do. They're going to be in the areas where the food is. Get there before the food is the easiest thing. The fish do get there before the food. So you need to be there before the fish are. Then you can present the food before he gets there. It's the same as trout fishing, just bigger. I think it's the way to put it. It's just bigger. I think one other thing that I think you need to prepare clients for if they're coming from a trout world is the aggressiveness of the fish. It's a different ball game. It's so different. I think the first time you go from catching, whether it be a stocked trout, a stocked rainbow, or a stocked brown in a river, the fight from them is phenomenal, and I'm a big fan of that. But the first time you hit a bass that really means business, and it can be 40 centimeter bass that means business, it's a different game altogether. They can take you to the backing. Even the small ones. The big ones, when you get into something more like 60, 70, 80 centimeter fish, well, they're definitely going to take you to the backing, and they're going to take you there quickly.
I remember somebody gave me a mark once, and I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to read it and then swallow the details. And like you say, it's very easy to become precious about these sorts of things, but it is, as you again say, it's a public resource. I know the story, the trawling boats or something would come in if they worked it out from whatever it was. But it does seem as though it is incredibly guarded. But I guess social media is probably changing that. And if it's public, well, I guess everyone's allowed to have a go at it. And you touched briefly on tides and turning up at, let's say, a new hotspot or a new mark. For people listening, if you're fishing somewhere for the first time, where do you like to be on the tide to start your fishing?
Oh, that's a tough question. It does depend on the mark, but I would say as a general point, get there probably 2 hours before low tide. Fish it out, fish it back in again. As a general rule, I think you'd stand the best chance in that area. And if you can get that at early morning, and I mean early morning, we're talking maybe 3, 4 a.m. to get your start there, and I think you'll stand a very good chance of catching fish. The later it's possible, all times of day. I found that last year. I think I did a little video thing, and I was catching from first thing in the morning all the way through to the height of the afternoon, and it made no difference. Sometimes it goes like that, but I would say the majority of bass are either caught at night or they are caught at the change of light. So daybreak, sunset tend to be good, but more daybreak because they're already there. They will come in at night. They will be hunting at night. And then as the tide washes out, they're still feeding and you'll catch them on the way out. They will come back in again at first light. Keep casting. You're going to catch more likely than you would do if you pop down for the afternoon. Probably not going to catch as much then. It's going to be tougher conditions anyway. The wind will have picked up by then. The tide will have picked up by then. The chop on the water will have picked up by then. All of that becomes much more complicated. So make it as simple as you can. Flat water, bit of flow. If you can find some structure, and by structure I mean whether that's bladderwrack or patches of other weeds, boats, good structure, jetties, anything in the water, they will hang around that. They're ambush predators. They're going to hang around that sort of thing and wait for the bait to flow past them. So rule of thumb, make it early, make it flat, and make it many casts.
And for me, that leads nicely for people who are heading, let's say, down to this neck of the woods on a family holiday, that you could get up early, go do some fishing, and then come back and do the family stuff as well. So it works really well from that point of view. I wanted to continue to ask you a few more questions and tackle. I know when we first started that we said, right, reservoir rods would be absolutely fine for your fishing. We all like to buy some new kit if we possibly can. But are you fishing? I know I had saltwater rods anyway, but for overseas trips, and we were using 8 weights when we started. But is that the standard still, or is that trend starting to go a little bit lighter as well towards 6 and 7
No,
weights?
no, I think 8 weights. 8 weights for bass, definitely. Your flies are quite big. They tend to be sort of 1.0 upwards. There are smaller flies, but you would definitely want an 8 weight. 8 weight is what I use. If I'm out boat fishing, I'll take 2. One with a sinking line, a real, a proper like a DI7 on it, a real fast sinking line, and one with a floating line, top water lures. Because that for me, that's where it's at. Top water fishing for bass is where it's at, and that's what most people want. 8 weight will do it. Weirdly, I've seen more people switching and going heavier and going into 9 and 10 weights for it. And I'm not sure why, because that's quite a lot of rod to be swinging around for 4 or 5 hours. Personally, I wouldn't go that high. I mean, I use an 8 weight for pike fishing, and I think what it comes down to there really is your casting ability. If you're comfortable casting big flies on a lighter rod, go nuts, do it. If you can make it work, make it work. But I wouldn't go too heavy for it. Look, casting 12 weights is ridiculous, and you will wear out fast doing that. Even with good technique, good hauling technique, you're still going to wear out fast doing that. So casting a 9 weight for a bass, I wouldn't personally, but if it works for you, do it. And I think as a rule of thumb, you should get the best kit that you can afford to buy. I don't think necessarily. I know a lot of people are tackle tarts, and they'll go out and buy the latest kit. If you can't afford it, don't do it. Just there are cheap's the wrong word. There are budget rods out there that will get you started into this quite well. You can get a budget 8 weight for probably less than £100 these days. I would say spend the money on a good quality line, because that's the bit that will frustrate you more than the rod. If you've got a cheaper line that coils, gets tangled all the time, that is going to drive, and I speak from experience, it will just drive you nuts on a day fishing, and it can ruin your fishing. Good quality line. Don't worry too much about the rod and the reel. I think you should worry more about the reels and the rod. This is a personal thing, and I have disagreements with some of my friends about this. They think that a reel is just there to hold the line. I disagree. The drag-on modern reels, especially those that you're using in the saltwater, are good enough to play fish on. If it's there, use it. It's a good tool for a good job. Others disagree. That's fine. To each their own. But make sure it's the best that you can afford. Don't overspend on it. There's no point. And don't go cheap on it. My dad says, buy cheap, buy twice. And to a degree, I think he's right. Buy inexpensive when you're starting, and then upgrade your tank. I think my first fly rod for bass cost about £90, which was expensive back then. And we won't talk about how much my latest ones cost, because I think I might get divorced if that gets discussed.
And so is it line trays, you're using those? And you touched on one of the questions I wanted to ask you was line densities. So floating line, absolutely fine. Then you talked about the dye line. Would they be the two that you would choose? Because, and the floating, not just from surface action as well, you can throw your clousers or whatever on that as well, is it? And then the dye, what situations are you using a dye line on?
Mainly the dye line I'm using on boats. I don't tend to use them in the harbours and estuaries because it gets down too quickly and you're going to get too tangled. There's an argument that intermediates are also good, especially if you're doing coastal work, because they sit just under the surface and then the chop on the water doesn't affect it so badly and you don't pick up so much debris. I'm not much of a coastal angler. I do it from time to time, but I'll use a floating line. but I do think an intermediate would probably make my life easier. But horses for courses. That's a word, yeah. But I definitely think floating line should be your go-to straight away if you're going to get weight forward floating, good quality 8-weight. Personally, at the moment, I'm using Scientific Anglers. A friend of mine put me onto that. They're one of the Titan lines. It casts nicely, it lays out straight, and it doesn't coil. That's what you want. I've used others in the past. They're much of a muchness, I think, when you're starting out. But when you start getting proficient, I do think you want to spend a bit of money on it. Even when you're starting, though, look for something that is renowned for not coiling. Even with a line tray, definitely on the salt, use a line tray. If you're not using a line tray on the salt, you're not going to get the best out of your casting. The tide, the water, the weed, all of that will wrap up in your line, and that's frustrating as well. I know loads of guys that don't do it, but I am seeing more and more people do it now. That said, I wouldn't recommend the bucket style line trays, if you know what I mean. I think Snowbee make them, and I think Orvis makes some as well. I don't know, but the more pallet style ones, I suppose there's loads out there now. But anything that's flat and is not going to hold water, because from experience, when a wave breaks into your line tray, well, you're going to get wet inside your waders as well. So. And also the pallet ones I find easier, especially if you're rock hopping, much easier to get around with. They're not in the way. You can, tuck them away. The one I use, I can't remember the brand of it, but it's, you can unclip it and it will hang flat alongside you. It's right out of the way. It will float next to you if you're in deep water. Line tray is definitely the way to go. I think you'll struggle without it.
What about leader? Let's say we're turning up with just a floating line. What about leader length and strength? What are you tying on?
I think I've started tying my own tapered now. I say started. I think I started last year tying my own tapered lines now. And I think you want to go down. The lowest I would go to, like tippet strength, would be about 12 pound, and I still work in pounds as opposed to X's. It's too complicated. Just stick with pounds. Everybody understands that. But about 12 would be the lowest I go. The thing with bass is they're not overly put off by lines. Some will say they are. They're not. They're really not. When bass are feeding, they genuinely don't care about anything else other than the bit of food that's in front of them. And I have found no evidence yet that going up from 12 to maybe 15 or 20 pound tippet has made any difference to a catch rate. They're there to be caught. They are, if you can tie tapered. I can't give you the percentages I use on it because it's written down, because I have a terrible short-term memory. I couldn't remember, but a friend of mine gave me a system to work with, and I think it goes from £30. As long as my first bit of my leader matches the curve of my fly line, when you put it together, if it should, then your transfer of energy is going to be okay. And then just step it down from that. £12. I wouldn't go any less than that, because sometimes, as we said earlier, the take when it hits is brutal. And you need that bit just to take the shock out of it sometimes. When you connect with it, it's a shock for some people, how quick it can happen and how aggressively it can happen.
Nice. You're getting me excited. Flies, I think, we know about Clousers, deceivers, the things that you've mentioned. We won't drill too much into that, but you've said bass are aggressive, ambush predators. I'm more interested in your retrieve and how you're bringing the fly in. What are you doing to manipulate the fly?
Situation sort of dictates, really. If you're fishing open water, you could roly-poly it in and just keep it coming through, especially if you're fishing on a boat. That will work. I personally don't like that. I don't find I get a lot of results from that. I prefer long sort of strips, maybe 2 foot long strips, and a pause. If I'm fishing top water, it will be shorter strips to try and create almost like a walk the dog sort of fashion with a gurgler or a crease fly. I'm a big fan of fishing a crease fly. You can get a good action with them occasionally if you tie them right, which sometimes I don't. You get quite a spurt of water out the front of them as well, which adds to the attraction to the bass. They're looking for noise. They're looking for things that shine. They're looking for anything that is moving. They will come and investigate it. And if it's moving in the right way, they're going to hit it. So short, sharp strips generally, but mix it up. If that's not working, try long, slow strips. Sometimes if you get it into the flow, just a dead drift will do it. A dead drift with a deceiver can be absolutely brilliant for bass. But the situation is just vary it up, change. It's the same as trout fishing. Change what you're doing. If it's not working one way, change it. I think it's slightly different in the sense that if dry fly is not working, you can switch to nymphing, or spiders and other such flies. The same fly for the bass is going to have the same effect. But if your retrieve isn't working, just change it. Just do something different. Impart a bit of life into it. Even have it in front of you in some clear water and just see what your retrieve is doing to the fly. How is it making it look? Does it look like it's fishy to you? If it looks fishy to you, it's probably going to look fishy to them as well. They investigate anyway. They're going to come and look at it. I think I saw some video footage a little while ago of bass in Cornwall, I think it was, the amount of stuff that goes past them that they look at and don't touch. Flies, lures, they'll look at it. They'll come up right up to it, look at it and go, no, don't want that. And then for no reason, suddenly they'll take it next time. Nature's weird. They do stuff you can't sort of predict. So vary your retrieves. I'd start with foot-long strips, no matter what you're doing, whether it's Klaus's deceivers, topwater lures, foot-long strips. If it gets hit and it doesn't connect, I think the most important thing is stop. Just stop and then start again. You only got to stop for a few seconds because sometimes bass, they will swipe at things to stun it. There's footage online now. You'll see them. They'll actually hit things with their tails. I didn't know this until last year. They will actually swipe at prey with their tails and then circle back to it. So just stop and then just a little twitch again. And sometimes that can produce it. Sometimes it doesn't. So vary it. See what happens.
There's some wonderful advice there. You said as well, I'll reiterate what you said very early on in the conversation about covering water as well and keep mobile. What you've done in this conversation so far is shown to me your demeanour, the way, your calmness, your knowledge, that you speak and sound exactly like a guide, and that's because you are a fishing guide. What made you want to become a fishing guide?
I think it was taking family members out is what made me do it. Taking family members out that had never done it before, and helping them achieve, catching a bass, their first bass. And I think I've taken, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 people out that are either friends or family that have never caught a bass on the fly before and managed to get them to do it. And that kind of inspired me to say, look, if I'm getting this much joy out of doing this, why not help other people do it? If we can get more people into this, then we're going to keep it alive. My biggest worry would be that with the state of things, that this sport could die out in time, and I don't want that to happen. I think as anglers, we provide a very good resource for nature. Most of us are invested in the environment around us, and I think we do more good than people realize. What we were saying earlier about reporting things to the EA or to the other authorities for what it's worth. If we're not there, who else is doing it? So the more people that are doing it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And the more people that enjoy doing it, the longer they're going to stay doing it. I'm not going to lie and say, I get as much enjoyment out of guiding people as I do from fishing, because that's not true. I'd much rather be fishing myself. But it's nearly as good. It is nearly as good. I do enjoy. I don't fish with clients during a session. If we want to fish on afterwards, I'll fish with them afterwards, but I won't fish with them. and I try not to take a rod off them to show them a technique, because you know what's going to happen if you do that. And it has happened. It's embarrassing, but it is what it is. Sometimes that's going to happen. But I know guides that do fish with their clients. Okay, that's fine. It's my choice not to. I don't even take a rod with me. I'll take a net and that's it. But to get people into it, to see the joy in their face, to see the excitement on their face, even if they're not catching, they're getting bust ups off the top or something, or they get a big bend in the rods, from something that's grabbed it under the water. It's great. I love it. But I'd rather be fishing. It is frustrating at times. Sometimes you get people that, maybe aren't as good as they think they are at it, and you could be doing better and thinking, oh, I could catch that fish. That could be caught. And they're not. But that's what guiding's about. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's great.
I still get a hell of a lot of phone calls from people saying, I want to be a fishing guide. And that's the first question I ask is, if your client's stuffing a big trout on a river, or in your case, a bass, are you okay with it? And if you're not okay with it, walk away now, because it's not going to be for you. You're going to get frustrated. You're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to give your sport a good day as well. So that's of key. Question I often ask, what's it like when that first fish is in the net? Because that's always a nice euphoric moment for a fishing guide, isn't it?
The relief of when the first one's in the net is something else. It's, you can't beat that. That feeling is so close to actually catching it yourself, because you've done your job right then. And I think it's tough sometimes, because there are days when nothing gets caught. And I find that tough for me. It's almost embarrassing to be paid for that day when nothing has been. And it's such a difficult thing to try and put your head around, to say, I've said we're going to go out and we're going to do our best to catch fish, and we've not achieved that. So the moment that first fish goes in, and to be honest with you, I don't care how big it is. If that fish is in the net, we've done a good job already. And 9 times out of 10, clients are happy with that. Being a good net man is something I think that a lot of people aren't. And I think it's being calm is a good net man. And I've got to be honest, I think I learnt this from my dad. I have never been shouted at so much as I have been by my dad as a kid, trying a net carp for him, having to wait and positioning the fish above. It is a technique in its own right. And if you're a good net man, you're going to net more fish. And I think that's an underappreciated skill in fishing and guiding. You need to learn how to use a net properly. Too many people stab at fish and chase them around. It's faster than you. It doesn't matter how tight. It's still faster than you in the water. You're not going to catch it. Just let the angler bring it to you. Get the net underneath it. And then everybody can relax, because everything's done then. Then you can do your grip and grin and everybody's happy, and get that fish back in the water as fast as you can.
Absolutely. And the background that you're in, that, as you've said, is a difficult one to not guarantee fish, because any guide wouldn't guarantee fish for people. But it's a very, very difficult one. And managing people's expectations is a key part of being a guide as well, isn't it? And you're doing the very best. Yet there is that big plus side when that fish is in the net. And like you say, there is that moment where you're feeling, right, they have done the right job of hiring me. I've found them fish. And that's a pleasing moment as well. Have you enjoyed every moment of it? I think I know the answer, but have you?
Generally, yes. Generally, I don't think there is a downside to it, because even if it's a day of just having a conversation about the fish, about the environment, about where we are, what we're looking for, and how to do it, that seeing people maybe learn something they didn't know beforehand, that's good. It's also stressful. The days when the fish aren't there, or they're not playing by the rules, they're just not feeding. That's a stressful day. But if you can give the client something to go away with, I think that is you're still doing your job. Then I think I'm pretty sure most guides are doing that, and if they're not, they really should be. You know, the clients aren't just paying for fish. That's what they want. I understand that. That is what they want. They want you to put them on fish, but they need the knowledge. They need the skills. And I think if you can deliver some of that as well, the fish is a bonus at that point. I think for me, you know, I think we discussed earlier, I'm trying to be a casting instructor officially. So teaching clients, if they're coming to me with maybe a fault in their casting as well that's hampering them, or a technique they don't fully understand, even if I can get that across to them, I think that is a benefit to coming with me. I can help you with that cast. If you can't haul properly, we can spend an hour working on that. We can just sack the fishing off for a bit, spend an hour, move to another area. We can work on getting that out, and then you can put that skill into practice and hopefully improve your chances of catching a fish. But I think it's, like you said earlier, you should never guarantee that people are going to catch. It doesn't matter how good it was the day before or the week before, or how it's been as good as it has been for as long as it has. On that day, they may not play by the rules. They may be there and just not interested. They may not be there at all. It's, you know, it is very much the luck of the draw, but give it your best, and hopefully your client will see that you've done everything in your power to do what they wanted you to do, and they've left with something, whether that be some knowledge or, you know, an improved cast. That's a win.
It's interesting what you were saying about, and I get the impression you're primarily, if not 100% bass, but if it's tricky, have you got areas, because it resonated with me when you said that you're there 2 hours before low tide, which I was when I was guiding bass myself many years ago, and I'm always bloody early, and that's where I first discovered looking at mullet. And so we'd play around for mullet while we were making a few casts. Again, I was like you, that, you know, the client does the fishing, not me, but we'd play around with those for a little bit until we started, right, okay, we're seeing signs, or we think the bass are starting to be on the move a little bit more. Have you got that in your pocket? Is mullet something that you're curious about and you have, should you need it?
I absolutely fish for them. I enjoy fishing for them. People describe them as the British bonefish. I think that's a pretty good analogy. I've not caught bonefish yet, but I know people that have, and I have seen videos of bonefish go. So having hooked into some nice mullet, I think it's a fair assessment. I don't guide for them yet because I don't feel that my knowledge is good enough yet to do that. And I think I would be selling snake oil there. And just down the road from me is Colin McLeod. If you want a mullet guide, that's your man to go to, not me, that's for sure. But it is definitely an art that people should be looking at, especially if you're coming from a trout background. It's more similar to what you're going to be doing there anyway. It's about dead drifting and slow retrieves. It's about smaller flies, lighter rods. You don't want to be using an 8-weight for mullet. That's going to put them off. I think 5-6 weights is what generally I use, a 6-weight for it, but that's because that's what I had at the time, and now that's my dedicated mullet rod. But I think others use 5 weights. Some of the guys I go with, they use 5 weights. I know of 2 that use 7 weights, but even that I think is probably a bit much. And I think people do get confused with the rod weight to the fight of the fish over and above what they're actually casting. And once they get their head around that, you kind of see that that makes more sense. We're casting tiny flies. But, mullet, definitely. There's a strong market for that now. Mullet are here in abundance. There is a lot of them. But finding feeding mullet, that's difficult. That's really difficult. And those are marks that are very closely guarded by people that guide for them and fish for them. People are not going to give that stuff away. I think rule of thumb, if you can find mullet that are in numbers and are tailing, so for those who don't know, if their fins are out of the water, especially the tails, that means they're feeding. Now, single mullet are unlikely to take a fly. if there's a group of mullet together, you stand a much better chance because they compete heavily for a lot like carp will. They will compete for the food items that are around them. They'll push each other out the way to get it, and you're more likely to trick one of them into taking your fly. And your flies for this as well are tiny in comparison to bass flies. I'm not going to lie, I can't tie flies that small. I am terrible at it. I will stick to pike flies and bass flies because, it's failing eyesight and unsteady hands. It's not for me. I will get somebody else to do that for me. But if you can tie nymphs and size 10 and 12, 12, 16s, things like that, you're going to be onto it. Bug patterns, nymph patterns, shrimp patterns, all that sort of thing. Red seems to work for mullet a lot. And I think Colin's been experimenting with blue recently, and that seems to have been producing as well. I have no idea why that is, but it seems to work at the moment. So leaders and that they're more complicated than bass leaders. You're going to fish droppers, so a point fly and a dropper, and the taper to it is odd. I don't fully understand it. We're using like cut down bonefish leaders, and then into 10 pound, I think, maybe 12 pound fluorocarbon. And I think for both species, fluorocarbon is the way to go. Don't mess around with copolymers or monos or anything like that. Stick with fluorocarbon. You'll get better stretch out of it. You get less glare in the water. You don't need to worry about mud and things like that. It doesn't seem to have a bigger effect. I think saltwater fish, there's more crap in the water already. I don't think they're bothered about things that are drifting around them so much. Trout are a lot more finicky for sure, but definitely find, there's not many guides for it. There's a few. I don't know of anybody local to me other than Colin, but I don't think Colin guides over here anymore because the mullet fishing in our area, we were discussing it last summer. As I didn't realise until I bought Colin's book that where I started my lure and fly fishing, there's pages of that in Colin's book, the same areas, and he's having great success and I wasn't. But that's the mark of the man, though, I feel. But if you can't find a guide for mullet, find estuaries. Estuaries were a good bet. Estuaries and flow. If there's mud, they're going to be mullet. It's simple. They root around in the mud. You're less likely to find them over gravel. You will find them over gravel, but I think if you find yourself some muddy estuaries, mullet will be there. If they're there in numbers, you're probably going to catch. If they're tailing, you're very likely to catch. Then the difficult bit is keeping it on. Because once, if you hook it, it is gone, and it is gone real fast.
Fantastic. And I love and respect you for saying that you don't have the experience or you don't have the knowledge, and then you imparted a load of knowledge to us. So I think you're doing yourself a disservice on that front. So I think there's another quiver, another bow for the quiver there. So from where I'm standing, we're going to start winding things down a little bit now because we've spoken for over an hour. However, you talked about your casting qualifications, IFF. I wish you best of luck with that. What made you go down that route? You said you looked at Gaia and you are going IFF. What's the reason for that?
FFI, Fly Fishers
FFI,
International.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. In honesty, Vic, my wife, she's American. I've got family in the States. Yeah. I've taught in the States. And Gaia's not recognised in the States. They don't care. But the FFI is a worldwide qualification. And to have that recognition that I am of that standard worldwide benefits me. If I'm honest, I don't know what the future holds for Vic and I, whether we're going to, it's unlikely that we're going to move to America, but there's always that possibility. I'm pretty sure we're not. We're going to stay in the UK, but having that ability to be out there, and if anybody wants casting instructions whilst I'm there, to have that card that says, we recognise you as being that person. That's why I switched the FFI over Gaia. Gaia's a great organisation. I do work with Gaia from time to time. I've done some instruction for them for the Beginners Saltwater Festival that Orvis do. I think I'm booked again for it this year. I'm teaching again there as one of their instructors, and it's great. I there's not a huge amount of difference. and I'm not going to run one down over the other, but I do think for me there were preferences in FFI. There are methods of doing things that work better for me than they did with Gaia. It's a personal thing, and I think for anybody that's got aspirations of teaching casting, either is good, and it's entirely up to you. Find, you get along to sessions. They run sessions at Holbury and Romsey on Sundays. There's sessions up there with Gaia and the FFI. You can get involved in that. It's not massively expensive to go. I'm not going to lie, tuition is expensive. That's a fact. It is expensive. You're going to pay by the hour. I charge quite a bit by the hour, but not as much as somebody that is holding that ticket, or an MCI Mastercaster is going to teach you far better than I can right now, and much better, more complicated techniques. And you're going to pay for that, I'm afraid. Yeah, that's just the way the world is. If you want somebody's experience and somebody's skill set, you've got to spend some money on that. But it's absolutely worth it. I did, and it's absolute game changer for me. My casting improved, I'd say 10 times in the space of maybe 6 months. I went from the guy that could put a line in the water and get a fish in to somebody that is now placing lines at distance to exactly where I wanted it. I learned about drift and drag. I've started to learn about different aspects of the cast. I'm trying not to go into technical details and bore everybody with all the minutiae of what happens in a cast, but there's so much there that you can't pick up without somebody explaining it to you. You're not going to get these things from YouTube. And that's not me trying to put business my way, because go to anybody. You don't have to come to me. But I promise you, there are aspects of a cast that a video is never, ever going to explain to you. Nobody is going to be able to show you on a video what drift feels like. And if you know what drift is in a cast, you've had a lesson. You haven't learned that from a video. Nobody's going to show you on a video what creep feels like. They can show you what it looks like, but they're not going to show you what it feels like. And once you get the feeling for these things, and somebody's there to show you what that feeling you got there, that's creep. That's a game changer for your casting. It starts to become clear then. It starts to become a real thing. It starts to become a skill. And once you have that skill, your fishing becomes easier. If fishing's easy, it's fun. If fishing's hard work, then it's work, and nobody enjoys work.
Very fair. I don't know why I got that wrong. It's always been FFF to me, and then it rebranded, didn't it? And I've forgotten by then.
Yeah,
so
it did.
I wish you the very, very best of luck with that. My final question, before I ask for your contact details, is can you give me a song for the Fly Culture Music Road Trip Mix Jamboree thing that's on Spotify?
Ooh. Okay. Most of what I listen to is probably not going to be appropriate, but as I got the moniker maybe last year or the year before of being the Dave Grohl of the fly fishing world, I'm pretty sure it's just because I got long hair and a beard and I play in a band. I like to think it's because I'm a nice guy like he is, but I'll take either. So I think probably Learn to Fly by the Foo Fighters.
Good choice. Good choice. He is, as you say, the nicest man in rock and roll after my buddy Perry. He's the nicest man in rock and roll. But great choice. Paul, it's been wonderful to catch up with you. And I would love listeners to be able to know how they can track you down, what your social media handles are. I know you do some stuff on YouTube. How can people find you?
I'm going to have to look that up because I can't remember what my links are.
You sound as bad as me.
I think I mean, YouTube's picking up a bit for me at the moment. I've only recently started it, but and then I promise there will be more fly involved stuff on there this year. I know a lot last year's stuff was lure based, but it was just easier to do then. But generally, it's either at Paul Bettley or at Pablo Fishes. That's the easiest way. Pablo Fishes on Twitter, Facebook. I think I'm Pablo 5150 Fishes I know the weird number, but it's a Van Halen album. It's my favorite. So Pablo 5150 fishes on Facebook, or just my name, Paul Bettley. That will find me. And I think my name will find me on YouTube and all the others. TikTok, I don't know what I'm doing with that, but it's there. But that'll do it. Pablo fishes otherwise.
Very good. And Paul's surname is Bettley. So that should make it nice and easy for people to find him. You're getting a sense of the person he is. I think he will be excellent company on the water. So I hope if you're bass curious that you might drop him a message or two about perhaps some guiding or just some information. He's given loads to us today. So, Paul, I'd like to thank you for that. It's been wonderful to catch up. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thoroughly enjoyed this. And if you want to come out and go bass fishing, just give me a shout. You can come down.
I definitely will. And perhaps you're going to be the Dave Grohl of bass fishing. So there we go. So from what I've learned today, I think you're in contention for that. So I would like that very, very much. Everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. There's loads of information. The weather's getting better. Why not go out there and give it a go? Thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.